This is episode 62 of the Wilderness Locals podcast. On this episode, my guest is Marvin Kwiatkowski, or as he's better known, BC Billies. Marvin is referred to by many as the unsung hero of mountain goat hunting here in BC. This podcast is brought to you by Kafaru International, the toughest hunting gear on the planet, bar none. Frontiersman gear, high quality, completely custom, handmade knives made in the heart of the Peace Country. And as always, we're brought to you by Just Shooting Arrows, BC's premier archery shop.
Yeah, that's cool. I used to do all that. I still always love getting the stats for where I'm going.
Oh, so
I don't
cool.
do it as much anymore.
Yeah, you don't need to anymore. You've been at it a long time.
I mean, I'm a numbers kind of junkie myself, right? That's just kind of how I'm wired too. So yeah. I just love stats and that kind of information. I did it more on sheep hunts, the sheep areas where I'd go than goat. I mean, goat, I hit it so hard because I lived right there for 20 years. So, I mean, I kind of had a pretty good idea of the numbers because I'm out there all the time.
Yeah. But so is that, I mean, we should maybe give the audience here a little bit of, we're rolling. Yeah. Why not?
That's cool.
Yeah. We'll just go right into it, but we should give the audience a little bit of, background here. I'm gonna butcher your last name if I have a similar last name too, but Marvin, how do I say your last name, Marvin?
Oh, Kwiatkowski.
And a lot of folks will know you as BC Billies.
That's correct. That's kind of the handle I've been going by for, 15 years, I guess, 16 years now. You're kind of the guy when you're a young guy and you're probing into, hunting BC and this place and that place. You often hear people say, "Oh, get a hold of BC Billies. He'll help you out." I've had a few guys connect, and I do actually have a passion to help guys out. And I'm passionate to chat hunting. So if a guy wants to talk goat in particular, mountain hunting, I'm all in. Yeah. Well, me and Ronnie were on the way to a job site. Oh, probably more than a year. So maybe it might have even been the year before last, I think. Yeah. And we were talking goats, and I had started to think about planning this trip, and he was, "Guy, you gotta talk to Marvin." I was like, yeah, who's Marvin? Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned Ronnie because, I mean, actually, I think I did an overnighter with Ronnie, and then you had just Chris Schultz on the other day. Yeah. And I think it was John Epp. So they were all up in the area I was living. That was many years ago. And I remember going in with him, and I think I stayed the night. But on another occasion in another year, I ran into Ron and his dad. Oh, awesome. Which, how many people I've run into goat hunting is very few. Like I could probably count it on one or two hands. Like you just don't see many guys, even in the popular kind of areas. But I ran into him and his dad. That was kind of cool. But you just don't see many guys. That's partially the reason I love goat hunting. You just don't have as much pressure, and you're kind of out there on your own. Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about hunting some of the places that I hunt is just not seeing folks. One of my buddies just got back from a very popular sheep hunt. And they actually ended up pulling the ripcord because they woke up to, like, I think it was 7 or 8 tents around theirs, and there's 40 dudes up there, and they're like, the romance just isn't here. Yeah. And I've had that as well. And the group I know that's out right now, the father and the daughter, I said, "Oh, you'll see some people." And then they didn't initially. And then they said, "Oh yeah, there was 3 tents there." And yeah. So that's the one thing sometimes with sheep hunting in particular, right? You just got to go deeper. I found over the years, deeper and deeper. And then usually it turns out there's less guys, but even then you can. That's awesome. So, well, let's rewind a bit here. How did you kind of get started? So I didn't grow up necessarily in a hunting family. My dad didn't hunt. I had an older brother. He's quite a bit older. He did a little bit of hunting. So I'm from sort of the central BC. Mm-hmm. north central. I guess grew up outside of town, but my dad was more into fishing. I had two uncles that hunted. So when one was he did taxidermy work. One was a trapper. I never hunted with them, but I obviously I'd chat with them, and they were kind of a bit of an inspiration as well. I would say I always had a passion for the outdoors, and I think some of the sort of motivations when I think about it, they're the influences. There was a book I read, and I have it still. I remember looking at that book when I was really small. It's Big Game Animals in North America by Jack O'Connor. So that book, I remember to this day, the animals that jumped out at me were the sheep, the goats, the grizzly, and I actually remember the antelope, which I was fortunate to do a hunt last fall. So more on the more mountain animals or the mountain game that sort of jumped out. And then I remember going to a friends of the family. They were older fellows that did fly-ins for sheep.
Oh, cool.
And I remember watching their slideshows, and I was like, I got to do this. This is just, kind of a romance. This is probably as romantic as you can get, fly-ins and big sheep, big curls. So I was probably 8 years old. So that's sort of how it started. But I mean, I was always into adventure. So grew up outside of the town and more the country, and just adventured on my own, right? Whether we had a raft back in a swamp, we would stay overnight. We were 10, 11 years old. We had, tree fort. It was really just a platform. Parents didn't even really know where our fort was, but I remember they said, "Oh yeah, you guys can do what you need to do," and we'd stay overnight there. I'd bike up the mountain. I lived near a mountain outside of the town I lived at, and my uncle had a cabin there, so I'd go up there in my teen years just by myself. So just adventuring. Then I did trips up Mount Robson with a bunch of people for quite a few years when I was a teenager as well. So just a passion for really the outdoors. And later on, I was able to afford the time and get into more of the hunting. But I did do a little bit of hunting with my brother when I was pretty young. So it was more just duck hunting. I don't even know if I went out for moose with him, but just had a little of exposure there. But one day I knew I was going to get into it. Just took time. So, I would say if you want to find out when I started, I was I'd say late onset. So 1996, I was 28 years old. Yep.
That's sort of kind of the timing I started hunting.
Yeah. Although I will say I got out a little bit while I was in university. So because I was away, for school, Vancouver, then I was over in Ontario for schooling, I really just didn't have the time or the money. But I was home for a co-op term one fall, and I remember I actually got out for a moose hunt, and I really didn't have any mentoring. So I got onto 3 moose. I had a tag for a big bull. I was by myself. I got onto 3 moose, and there was 2 immatures, which are the infamous hard to find 2-pointer or less. I was onto 2 of those, and then a bigger bull, and I was close, and I took a headshot at the big one, which I didn't even realize I shouldn't be taking headshots.
Oh yeah.
So I missed, and that was really the only moose hunting I've really done. So I was kind of focused on every other species, but yeah. So I had that experience, and I did some duck hunting on my own. I remember I just head out to a swamp, shoot some ducks, and then didn't even have a canoe. I just head in and strip down and go swim and retrieve the ducks. So, nothing fancy, but I just love to get out. So really didn't get out, kind of full on till I was, married and settled down and had a regular job and had holidays and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's awesome. So then when did the mountain goat addiction start?
Yeah, so that started. So I was based out of, my hometown is where I started to originally work, and that's where we got married. But then I was pretty much out of town for a year and a half working consulting in different communities. And the last community was where I'd lived when I was in my early 20s. So they sent me there for work, and I never came back. So I had a different company offer me a job. So I ended up on near the coast, Northwest BC.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of a paradise if you're into fishing and in particular mountain hunting. So I moved there in the end of 95, and then basically got geared up for 96 to start hunting. So really, when you're in those areas, there's not really deer. There's not a lot of moose. It's really, you're into goat, bear, and you can head north. You're closer to sheep as well.
Mm-hmm.
So really, that was it. Teamed up with a friend that I'd got to know back in '89, and he was sort of into moose hunting a bit, and he was keen to get into goat. And away we went. And really, the evolution or the learning process was steep, because I had no clue.
Yeah,
it was just a lot of desire to get out there. And what's changed over the years really is just the amount of time. So I'd go out, but it was more day trips, and maybe I don't think I did my first overnighter till I was in my third season.
Oh yeah.
But I actually got a billy the first year. The first trip out was end of September. I think it was like the 26th of September. Fresh snow. It was just nasty. I mean, I was slipping and falling, and I remember I had my glasses on at the time, and I'd, go right through the thick slide alder. So, when you're in the coast, it's pretty nasty for terrain. It's slide alder, devil's clubs, but just wet conditions. So that was, I think it was socked in the whole day. I remember we got onto one set of tracks once we got up high, but it was pretty much socked in, which is what a lot of my trips were. You go for one day and you're not really necessarily seeing much country, but eventually you do it enough, you're going to get some decent weekends and some decent weather. And so I think I got out, I think my first goat was November 4th of that first year. And that was a bit of a gong show as well.
That's awesome.
So on that trip, I think I remember crossing the creek 3 different times. You chase up into the cliffs. The goat would disappear. You go back down, cross the creek, strip down, found the goat again, back up. I think I did that the 3rd time, and I finally got the younger billy. So then you head out. I was elated. I mean, I still am. It doesn't matter. It was a smaller billy, but I was pretty pumped to kind of cut my tag on my first big game animal, and it was a goat. So, yeah. So that was kind of the start, and it just took off from there.
No kidding, eh? It's pretty wild, especially like when you get into hunting as an adult, how it takes off, and it takes off. I'm not sure there's another, I don't want to call it a hobby or that. I don't think, because we work towards this stuff all stinking year once you get going, but I'm not sure there's another thing that you can do in your life that gains traction or makes you focus as much as quickly.
Yeah. And, and thinking back, the gear we had, I mean, there was nothing fancy. I'm talking blue jeans, cotton sweatshirts. I mean, we'd blow through a pair of jeans pretty much on, almost every hunt until I figured out jeans aren't really the right clothing for conditions where it's wet. You get jeans on, they hug to you, and you just rip them open. So, I mean, the gear we had didn't lend to keeping us very dry. So a lot of times we would just be, you'd come back and you'd be soaked and you'd be cold. And I remember training even back then for trips, but because we pushed so hard on 1-day trips, like you're doing, in and out, you probably 12K in, 12K out. It's not easy going. So, you're up 3 a.m, you're leaving super early, driving an hour or two, long day, and then you're back sometimes at midnight. So they're long days, and you'd be just wrecked for the next week. Yeah. Just done.
Yeah. I do a lot of that right now. Being in the Chilliwack Valley here, I'm a couple hours from elk country. I'm a couple hours from good mule deer country. So I do a lot of, up at 3 or 4 on the road and hunting by first light and hunt to last light, It's
sometimes what you do, I think, when things are relatively close.
Yep.
Sort of in your backyard, is that you can kind of get away with the smaller trips. You just fit it in a day here, a day there. That sort of changed over the years. And I started to realize that if you're looking for, I guess, a more relaxed experience and maybe to focus on a more mature animal, I started to lengthen the trips, even when I lived right in the heart of the goat country.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 2008 was my first sort of 5-day goat hunt where we started to extend them. And, it was a much more enjoyable experience and the ability to kind of be way more choosy on the goat that you end up harvesting.
Yeah. For me, for a handful of years here, it's just been about, logging time in the field and gaining experience, and any opportunity I have to hunt right now, I do,
Yep.
It sounds like that's where you were too.
You know what? I think that's the key is there's no substitute for, I guess, just, boots on the ground and just getting out there. Cause that's kind of how you learn things. You can tell people and you can read, but it's not really till you're out there that you kind of learn you kind of got to learn by trial and error, and, made mistakes, still making mistakes. There's not really one trip where it's like, I don't learn something new. You don't pick up you're either learning something about the animal, about the area, or about your gear, or about your own mental or physical state. So it's pretty neat. That's the thing. And I think if it's like anything in life, if you stop learning, then it's probably time to move on. And I'm definitely, I love that component of always learning. There's always challenges.
Yeah. The last point there too about, learning something about yourself or your own mental condition or whatever. I find that to be, super true. And one of my favorite parts about hunting, I mean, it might sound cliche or maybe too romantic, but I find like with hunting, I a lot of stuff that I learn about myself hunting, I can apply to the rest of my life,
Yeah. I've probably learned as many life lessons, out in the wilds as I have, probably at home or at the office. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I've taken my son out and pulled him out of school on more than one occasion. I said, you're going to learn more on this trip than you will in school. And he's on board.
Oh yeah.
Because you learn about yourself, right? It just kind of, especially on the mountain hunting component where it's physically very demanding and it's it's a whole different level. And I think that's kind of one of the components of it. You can probably push yourself more than you envisioned you could. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need to. It's what it takes to get the job done or to survive.
Yeah, no kidding. It's so fun though too,
Exactly.
That's awesome. So kind of moving forward, if there's people out there that don't follow Marvin's Instagram, it's at BC Billies, and it's a catalog of very cool photos from Marvin's hunting career here, and you've done a lot of stuff that many guys will never do.
Yeah, and I haven't put all the photos up, but I'll probably slide a few more up. I've been thinking recently to put some of the earlier photos up, where we're in jeans and cotton shirts. But, I would say I feel very blessed and fortunate to kind of do a passion that I've had since I was a kid, and focusing kind of on more mountain hunting. And then I branched off. I think it was my third year in hunting, 1999. We did our first stone sheep hunt. So I was always passionate to do sheep. My buddy was keen to do caribou. So we had a mixed bag of tags. I think grizzly had a grizzly draw that year too. So we went up north. Actually got a caribou that trip. That's been my only successful caribou hunt, and the only time we actually had a tag. So I was able to do that, but that just focused and fueled sheep hunting. So I've been on quite a few sheep hunts and quite a few successful sheep hunts, and a lot of, I wouldn't call them unsuccessful, but where we didn't cut a tag, but still very successful in that. Just, learned a lot, loved the experience. And it took me, I think it was 6 years, six trips out of 7 years to get my first stone sheep. So, I mean, they don't come easy, and you often hear you're going to cut your tag. You're going to start hunting. By the time you cut your tag, you could be 6, 7, 8 years later, right? It takes that long at times.
Yeah. It looks like you've killed some beauty stones now.
Yeah. And actually, I probably will need to say this because I just realized it's 10 years today that I kind of probably the most impactful or memorable trip was 10 years today. We got a triple header on that trip, actually a double on the 6th of August. So that was I'm going to call that a double ball buster. It's probably one of those trips, it's even in goat hunting and sheep hunting. You kind of like every trip, you kind of want to like push it a little bit more than the last trip.
Oh yeah.
And it just like, that's just how it is. Sometimes you realize when I first started sheep hunting, I do like, you kind of hike in one day or a day and a half, or if you fly in, you just hike in within a day of the lake, say, but it's just kind of going deeper and farther and looking at the terrain, thinking, what, that's where I want to go. So it worked out on that hunt in 11 that we went deep. We ended up logging about 140 kilometers. It was a 15-day hunt. So that's kind of been the max, and just how the trip kind of shook out and some of the events that happened. It's, the stock itself, there's just a lot of romance and a lot of things that can kind of go south, and then sometimes the stars align and you get the ram that you've been looking for, and it's a pretty cool experience.
That's awesome. It's always so cool on the podcast, as a guy more in his infancy of hunting, hearing from guys like you and Ronnie and Chris Schultz and these kind of BC residents that if you're kind of in the hunting scene here, you hear about,
Yeah.
And it's cool hearing the stories and kind of how it came to be. And, you often wonder, are these guys on kind of a similar journey, to me? Like, were they on a similar path when they were, at this stage of their hunting? And often it's the same or much worse. You hear about them grinding it out for 6 years to kill a stone, or
it's pretty cool how it happens. And actually, I was just listening to the podcast there with Chris and talking about kind of the spot where they went, and the spot that I ended up going, I didn't really have an X on the map, but there was a fellow I worked with, this is probably mid 90s when I started, on the coast working. And there was a fellow that had done quite a few sheep hunts, and all he mentioned was a lake, he said, "Oh, you got to do this trip one day," and you got to, he didn't really give me any more than the direction from the lake, and that's pretty much all I took. And that was, I went. That was probably 13 years later where I ended up going into that spot, because it was always on my mind. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked me, I think I was in Ontario doing a holiday back in 2009, and a fellow texted me, or I don't even know if it was texting then, it was probably an email. And he said, you know anything about this lake? And I said, I know a little bit, but I've never been there. And then I remember, I emailed my buddy and I said, I've been thinking about this spot for so many years and this guy's asking me about it. I said, let's just make it happen. So I think it was that year we booked the flight. I did the first trip in there in 2009, and then we actually got 2 rams then too. And, but just, you think about these places, and then I was thinking, I'm not getting any younger. I got to start doing fly-ins. I got to start doing these dream hunts that I always thought about doing.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool. I think many of us start off similar, right? We might just get a little bit of intel, and then you just kind of run with it. And
oh, it's funny though how little information do guys like us need before we're spending a month going after it and just digging through every scientific paper or forum post or
well, I'm a Google Earth junkie, right? So now when it first came out, it was like, okay, this is like Christmas. It's like Christmas here every day. I got a new tool that, and it's helped even for identifying goat and sheep terrain, kind of looking for what kind of habitat they like. It's been pretty neat for that, right? Just kind of being able to fly around and zoom in on a location and kind of scope it out.
I actually have this dude that I'm planning on getting on here any day. His name's Mason, but he has a business, but the business is called Notch Navigator. And what he does is he compiles all of the government maps for forestry, oil, gas, wildlife, goat surveys, deer surveys, moose surveys, all of these different things. And he compiles them all onto one map.
That's pretty wild.
Oh, dude, they're unreal. And I kind of don't like talking about them. I want to help the guy's business out, but I don't want other people to know about them.
Yeah. Well, actually, the truth is some of the areas I hunt and still hunt, whether it be goat or sheep, the photography or the images on Google Earth are actually not very good, which is like, I kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't really tell if it's good terrain or not, but I know it is because I've been there. But you almost, it's, I mean, I just found over the years too, with communication devices and inReach, and satellite, I'm finding guys, you get more in people, not just guys, but individuals going a lot deeper because you got connection, you got confidence, you're able to connect with your partner even if you both have the inReach. There's a problem, you're going to have help in no time, right? So it's kind of, everything's kind of enabling individuals to kind of push it harder, go deeper. And I think that's what I'm starting to see.
Yeah, totally. It's pretty wild how technology is sort of pushing this stuff forward too. And you'd think you often think, you're so far removed from cell service and your help and society, and not society, but civilization and all this stuff. Then you remember you can hit a button and a helicopter can come save you. So let's go a little further.
And I've been there. I was rescued once.
Oh, really? Eh?
But it wasn't on a hunt. It was 30 years ago this year where I fell in a crevice on a mountain. So, so that actually, all those experiences in life kind of weigh in on how you approach things. And as much as I've taken risks, especially on goat hunts in particular, I still think things out a lot because I've, life's pretty fragile and it takes one slip and you're in the chopper.
Yeah.
Hopefully alive.
Yeah, no kidding. That's something I think all of us folks have to remember out there, right?
Yeah, it's exactly. And especially if you go solo, which I've done some smaller solo trips, right? Just be careful.
Yeah, I spend most of my time in the bush by myself, we have I told you this before with my daughters and my wife. I have a no hunting weekends rule, right?
Yeah.
So I'm hunting Monday to Friday quite often when most folks are at work, and it works out because a lot of areas that get a lot of pressure, I don't see anybody. So
have
to be careful though.
No, that's exactly it. So you can actually work around others, work around your schedule if you're single or not single, but going out solo kind of gives you an edge on not bumping into the weekend warrior.
Totally. So I think I could probably spend a whole day hearing stories and stuff like that, but I want to ask some selfish stuff because
go for it,
dude. I'm going on my first goat hunt, right? I've seen lots of goats and stuff like that, but I'm going on my first real goat hunt that I'm gonna try to kill one of these guys, and I have you on the phone. So I think it would be a wasted opportunity if I didn't ask a bunch of selfish tactics and stuff like that. And I think I was saying to you offline that I think a lot of people would benefit a great deal from robbing some tricks of the trade from BC Billies.
Yeah. I mean, we can go into all sorts of different things. The one thing that a lot of people talk about is the white painter suits, right?
Yeah.
Is that a go-to? Is that something that's a must, or what's the thinking there? I haven't used the painter suits a lot, but I have used them, and with success, more in the rut. I found, we had them on, and I remember this was late November. And I had like Billy's, actually one basically charged us. So we get to get the guy. That wasn't the one we shot, but we shot another one right close that came close as well. You're, especially in the rut, they're not quite thinking quite as clearly as they're not quite as aware. So
I don't blame them.
Just having that white kind of, they're thinking you're a goat.
Yeah.
And if you're in snow, I guess you're going to blend in a bit more to the snow. You'll see Dall sheep hunters with those on. I don't know if you've seen many sort of videos of that, but I've seen that sheep hunting as well, more for Dalls, because then you're looking like you're a sheep as well. So I would think, I bring it. I often bring it. I don't often always use it.
Yeah.
There may be an advantage to a bow hunter, just because you're going to need to get really close, of course, whether you want to get 30 to 50 yards away. So it doesn't hurt to have it. But I'd say most of the time I haven't needed it or haven't used it. But that's something people ask. And they're so light, right? They're so light that to bring it isn't like, it's not going to be an extra 2 pounds. It's ounces.
Yeah. One of the things you always hear sheep hunters say is, sheep are way more skittish than goats. And you hear goat hunters say goats are much more skittish than sheep. What is it? What's true?
Yeah, I'm, it's funny. I found when it's younger sheep or ewes and lambs, or whether it be nannies and kids, I find that they're not as skittish for the most part. But when it comes to, say, a more mature billy or a ram, mature ones, they're going to be more skittish. But in general, I find the goats not as skittish when they're in their terrain, and that's being in the cliffs or right close to the cliffs. When I've caught billies in the open more, I find they're definitely more skittish.
Yeah, they're kind of caught with their pants down a bit.
Makes sense, right? Because if they're getting chased by a wolf or a wolverine or a grizzly, they're going to be hunkered out in the cliff and they're going to feel pretty safe. So, I mean, that's a lot of times I've been close to a lot of billies. Most of the time it's, they're in their territory. They're in the cliffs. But I mean, bow hunting, getting close to goats, a lot of guys get close, but sometimes it's hard. Like you hear a lot of shots that are 300, 400, 500 yards. Some take it more. I would never myself. I'm not comfortable past 400 really.
Yeah.
So they could be skittish, for sure, if they're in the open more. So you often.
So advice that you often receive when talking to experienced goat hunters is, if you can, come from above.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. they're always typically looking down. Yeah. So if you come, I mean, I'm trying to think. My last goat was 2 years ago. I came from above 100. I was the closest I could get was 100 yards, but I was like directly above him on a cliff that was 100, and he never was going to look up. So you can do that if it's a 20 foot cliff, even just a small cliff. You can get right on them up from behind. And I mean, with goats, typically billies are typically alone, or they're in a bachelor group. I've had billies, 4 mature billies together, right tight. But you just have less eyes as well. Whereas sheep, generally, a lot of times rams hang out in a big band. So you might have 10, 20 rams, and they're all facing different directions. So you generally don't have that with goats, because they're simply going to be the single, or he's going to be just 2 of them, and they typically are going to be looking down. So I'm just trying to think of another strategy which I've changed over the years, whether it be goat or sheep hunting. I pretty much have my gear with me all the time, so I can kind of set up camp. I mean, I may have a base camp, but I find you may go on if you have only a base camp. I was doing like sheep or goat hunting, especially sheep. I'd be doing 25K a day, leave at 4 a.m, come back at midnight, start again the next day at 4, because you're going so deep. So why not just have an emergency or a small shelter with you? Always throw my sleeping bag in. And basically if you get on something, and you could either, if you harvest that animal just before dark, you basically have your camp right there, rather than, I used to always hike back all night. Not always, but if I got something, deal with the animal right away, and then hike back, in the night all the way back to camp, and just be whooped. And then there's inherent dangers if hiking in the dark, if it's socked in, often the weather's crappy. So that's just something I found over the years that I've really changed, is actually just, you save a lot more energy. You just have your gear with you. If you get onto rams just before dark, you just bed right there. It's nice to have a shelter. I mean, I would stay, I've spent quite a few nights with no shelter, sleeping in my large garbage bag. That's what I used to use for my shelter, but that's not very comfortable. So yeah, there's, other things. I mean, just the terrain generally, I always find it's braided, kind of rocky terrain with some feed on it. Sheer rock faces, I mean, they're on those as well, but generally they like it where there's some, vegetation, some cover, so they can, kind of hunker out and hide. But I find what you call braided terrain, where it's not smooth, but there's lots of places for them to hide. And that goes for sheep as well, but in particular goats. And then of course it's all different depending on the time of year you're going. So when I goat hunted, I could hunt from August 1st to February 28th, because that's the season up north. And that's what I did for most of my hunting career, is hunt sort of you're hunting 7 months of the year. So every season is quite unique and quite different. Summer hunting is quite different from fall hunting. And then when you get into the winter hunting, that's a whole nother game. So the techniques are different. Like in the summer, you're coming from above and you're basically hunting alpine. Whereas when you get into the fall, as soon as the snow starts coming down, the goats are pushed down into the cliffs and the nasty terrain. You're basically hunting from below. So the tactics are totally different. And I always suggest new hunters sort of do a summer hunt. It's more enjoyable for the most part. The weather's better. The goats are concentrated up high, so you're probably going to see more goats, and you're probably going to get more opportunities. So I think what you're doing is what I would suggest. And that's even the guys I'm taking this year from Alberta. I suggested we do as late of a summer hunt as possible, because I want an enjoyable experience for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So weather in kind of northern BC, coastal northwestern BC. When does stuff start to take a turn for the worse normally up there?
Yeah. Well, last year it turned for the worst starting August 1st. It was just brutal last year. And I don't know if you taped what we talked about earlier, but 8 out of the 10 days last August that we were out were pretty wet and non-huntable.
Yeah.
So, but generally you're going to find August is pretty good into mid-September. I always found being on the coast, anything past September 20th, is going to start to be a real gong show. And then you're going to start getting snow. So then you're sort of, are you doing an alpine hunt? What kind of hunt is it going to be? So generally if you go into October, then you're into a hunting from the bottom generally, because the snow starts coming. So you'll get early snow hit normally.
Yep.
The long weekend of September, but it won't stay till say October 1st.
Got it. Cool. And then another thing that I've kind of been, mulling around, looking at maps, planning routes, looking at where I want to be starting glassing from and stuff like that. Generally, early summer, we're thinking about animals trying to stay cool and that kind of thing. So you kind of think about where the good feed would be and then where they would want to bed, right? Should we be glassing north or south faces to start, you figure?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a really good point, and I wasn't able to make the sheep count or the goat count. I mean, down south, my daughter got married, and that the first weekend, then I had my parents here, so I was hoping to come down and meet a bunch of the goat fanatics.
Yep,
that was a hot weekend, of course. And
I think it was the hottest so far, right?
My guess was going to be it's going to be tough to find goats. So the weekend I wouldn't be hunting goats. Where I lived when I lived up north was the August long weekend. Generally, just because that's usually the time when it was quite hot. And I always found you could still find the goats. They're just tucked in behind. They're actually on snow a lot of times. They're in the bowls in behind. But a lot of times they're like wedged right in the crevices and in the crags on the north facing slopes. But you would find them first thing in the morning feeding up top. So in the morning, it's obviously cooler, or late evening. So they'd come back up out of the cliffs and basically be on the grasses, basically on the very top of the mountain, or in, say, a saddle. But otherwise, for the most part, in really hot weather, they're going to be, tucked in on those north faces. And when you're talking really bad weather, like what we found last year, those goats are going to also be in the cliffs for a different reason. What I think for the most part is they don't feel as secure when they're out on those faces when they can't see very far, because you could have a wolf or the grizzly kind of sneak up on them. So the more open it is for weather, they're actually sometimes out in those open faces because their visibility is significantly, they can see from a distance what's coming. So I guess I found in the really crappy weather, they're generally going to be in the cliffs, and then in the really hot weather too.
That's awesome. Yeah. When I was chatting with the biologist there from the area that I'm hunting, she was like, well, they're, you'll see on the survey stuff, they're generally always above tree line in that area, and they're either in the kind of alpine meadows or they're up high. And she specifically made mention of the single adults, which I guess would be billies, right? Yeah, will be in the cliffy stuff there. So usually now I've been fooled. This one night, I think it was like 2001. I was going out on a goat hunt, and I spent the night at the bottom of the mountain, and I looked up, and there was like 5 goats that weren't together. They looked like they were mature single animals, and I assumed, without looking really closely, I don't think I had a good spotter, I thought they were 5 like single billies. So I could hardly sleep that night. I was like, this is going to be like, there's like 5 mature billies up there. I got up there were 5 mature dry nannies. Oh, wow. So, not always. And I mean, that's a whole nother discussion and getting into, is the identification of, I think that's an important discussion to have, though.
It is, and actually probably the one reason I love goat hunting, and there's so many facets to it. The terrain is difficult, but it's a game of inches too. Like the difference between a mature billy and an average billy or a small billy, like there might be an inch there. Mm-hmm. And the difference between a nanny and a billy, a lot of times, and I've been fooled, isn't much. Like sometimes there's nannies that are pretty beefy on the horn and have pretty good bases.
Yeah.
That it's tricky to tell.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that photo you posted of that 12.5-year-old billy, like, wow.
Yeah, that, I'm trying to think which one that is. Well,
I'm trying to think about which billy is the 12.5-year-old one.
We've had a few mature billies that are not age, right? Which is like, that's like anything 10, 12 years old. Like that's as pretty much old as you're going to get a lot of those billies to be.
Yeah.
But
or was his teeth just were his teeth just toast or what?
Yeah. I mean, we've had a few, like I think the one we took with Chris Schultz, that was a 12. I think that was 12.5 or 13.
Yeah.
He had no teeth left. I took one with my nephew. He was 12, no teeth as far as I recall. I took one in the Kootenays. That was 12. That was 2 years ago. He might have had some teeth still, but that one had horn rot though. That was the one that I just got done up in a Euro, but he had horn rot.
Oh, really?
But I just love those goats that are just stacked with the rings, and that are pretty much at the end of their life. That's what every kind of hunter dreams of.
Yeah, no kidding. So what I mean, I think we've all probably watched that video from Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance where Ranella goes through all the different kind of things there. But what Marvin, what are some of your telltale signs for aging goats and telltale signs for identifying sex of goats?
Right. Maybe the one I don't want to leave this one off. It's just on horn length, because you're always kind of looking for, like, generally you're going to get a mature goat. If he's old, he's probably going to have some good length if you're in a good area with good genetics. So there's always the debate of is 8, 9, 10 inch on the horn. Guys say, look at the length of the ears. I've never really used the ears. I actually use the tip of the nose to the corner of the eye.
Yeah, they said it's about 10 inches, right?
No, it's usually 8, 7.5 average.
Okay.
Depends, I guess, where you're taking it from the nose. But for the most part, I've measured quite a few goats, is that it's generally, I mean, you might look 10, but for the most part, they're on a mature goat at the most is going to be about 8 inch from the nose to that corner of the eye. So it's got the same angle, really, if you're looking at it sideways, as the horn. So if I take a photo, even when I'm in the field, so I know if basically that horn looks pretty much the same length, then it's like, that's only 8 inches at the max. A mature goat, I mean, a lot of them are going to be a 7 inch or 7.5. So at the most, if it's just kind of like the same length, I want to make sure it's like 2 inches more. Okay. Like if it's an inch more, okay, you're maybe at a 9 inch. But if it looks like that, their horn is like 2 inches longer than that length, then I'm into a 10 inch goat. That's a good goat. And then that's only one factor. Then the other factor is the Roman nose. Yeah. I mean, a big goat, mature goat's going to have a good Roman nose, and that Roman nose doesn't start usually till they're 5 years old. Okay. So a lot of times a goat might look good and it's just like the body's smaller too. That's another thing.
I'm starting to get a big body and a Roman nose, so I'm getting old.
There you go. So I think that's like myself, right? I got a good kink in my nose from a few accidents. And, you live life, you get a bit of a broken nose, or you get some kinks. So yeah. That's exactly it. So that Roman nose is kind of critical. The tough thing, if a goat's single, it's harder to tell. But if you've got like two goats together or in the rut, it's easier, because often the billies are with the nannies. Then it's like a big goat just jumps out. but often two billies are together and one might just tower over the other. Like they're both probably mature, or one might be a 4-year-old and the other is an 8-year-old. That 8-year-old's going to have the big Roman nose. His body's going to be a lot bigger. There's something about the face, with the big mature goat. And then the other factor is the dirty butt. Often that's the case more with the billies than say a nanny even. Especially during the rut, they just tend to
have that stained patch, eh?
Yeah. Urinate and then rub themselves in it. And that's just part of the ritual that they do. Mm-hmm. And the horn, I guess that's the big thing too, right? The sweeping horn of a billy versus the kink of a nanny, and just generally the size. But some nannies, I tell you, those ones in the Okanagan, those photos that Darren Epp takes.
Oh yeah,
he fools people because those are pretty good genetically gifted nannies. Mm-hmm. So there's nannies that can fool, and I've been fooled.
Oh yeah.
But generally they're thinner. They don't carry their mass.
Yeah. And I mean,
they got that kink.
Yeah. When you see some of the photos of like the billies that you've taken and when you see some really good billies, like Chris's there, they have that horse face too. Yeah.
The big horse head. I found any animal, and I haven't even gotten into grizzly hunting. We might leave that for another day.
Yeah.
But whether it be, and I mainly focus on grizzly, sheep, and goat, any big animal, it has just like, holy frig, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Like once you've been out and hunted enough, it's like anything. They just stand out. A deer, obviously you've got a big rack that jumps out. So it's a little bit easier, but it's harder on sheep, goat, and bears in particular to just like easily say that's a monster.
Yeah. I have a hard time, in the field judging bears. I don't know what it is. It's like my perspective gets messed up. I've had a few times where I'm looking at a bear, I'm like, that's not a big bear, and then whoever I'm with, like Chad, my hunting partner Chad, there has killed a whole pile of bears, and he's like, dude, that's a giant bear. What are you talking about?
It's tricky. Bears in particular are probably the most difficult.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Very, very cool. And man, there's so many things. So, I had one last good question, but I could skip right towards the end of my notes here. And the end of my notes are what's been your most memorable, goat hunt to date, or your favorite goat hunt to date? And then is there any itches you're still trying to scratch?
Oh boy. I'm glad you're just talking goat, because if we got into bear and sheep, I'd have lots of stories there. But goat, I've been on so many. No, you know what? I've been on a lot of goat hunts, as you probably have realized.
Yes.
That it's, and I didn't even get into this. I've got probably a top 5, but just in general, 2006, I love taking guys out. I love taking new hunters out. I've taken non-hunters out. I got a lot of them that have never come back. But 2006, I took 2 17-year-olds out on 2 different trips. Those are extremely memorable. They were book goats, both of them got, but just a whole new world of experience for both of them. The one story with my nephew, I wrote up a story in Eastman's for that one. Just that was where we got under the 4 billies. That was a tough haul, but just to see kind of what my nephew, that was his first exposure to mountain hunting. Hauling out two mature billies in the middle of the night, crossing, a knife ridge in crappy weather, raining, fogged in, those kind of experiences. And I've had lots of them. It just kind of resonate in what you can push yourself, and just the memories and the relationships formed. The guys that I've gone with over the years, are just like, you become brothers because you kind of share experiences that are pretty, most people aren't ever going to experience them. Most people wouldn't want to. But those of us that do like those, that's kind of what we dream about, busting your body as much as you can and going deep and pulling out some mature animals. Another one, it's more recent. I think it was in 2014 with my good buddy Todd. He's good friends with the Schultz boys as well. He was one of my main partners when I lived on the coast. He's another guy. I took him on his first goat hunt and he was like, no thanks. His legs seized up. I mean, he was like that. He was done. Mm-hmm. And I took him on another one and he came back and, he ended up becoming passionate about goat hunting. It sort of just grows on you. And there's something like you'll say, I never want to do it again. And you know what? You can't stop thinking about it. It's almost like when you get home, you're like, there's something about that trip, and a lot of stuff we don't share with our wives, till later, like years later. Yeah. But it brings you back for more. So 2014, I was with my buddy, Todd, got onto, a mature billy, close to 11 inch at, I think it was 70 yards. There was 2 goats up there. We decided we'll just take the one. It was kind of the goat I'd been looking for. It'd probably be a nice kind of 11-inch billy is nothing to sneeze at, and they're tough to find. It's tough to find a 10. I thought we were going to drop that goat on the top of the mountain. He was in a good spot. Goats are tough. I didn't even get into that yet. Yeah. That's another technique is don't ease up on the lead if you're using a rifle. Mm-hmm. Cause they are tough. I think that goat I missed. He was bedded, which that's another strategy. Bedded goats aren't the best to shoot at. I've had some interesting stories. So I think I missed him on cause he had the long hair. I was going for the spine shot cause I was so close. Yeah. So that goat took quite a few hits to bring him down. And in the end, I ran to catch him before he went over the cliff. I wasn't quick enough to grab him. That was an unbelievable retrieval that I did solo. Todd was smart and he stayed up for the 6 hours. Took 6 hours to go down 400 yards in the cliffs and come back up. That trip, I got up just before dark with that goat on my back. In hindsight, probably shouldn't have done it. I had recollections of a chopper coming again to get me. But I just barely made it to the top of the mountain. And then we hunkered just in the bowl because we couldn't get back to our base camp. I had nothing left in me. We didn't have our camp. We had our sleeping bags though. And then we hunkered in our big plastic bags. And then, those kind of experiences are, most people probably don't want them, but you learn a lot about what you can push yourself through and just the mental, physical, emotional kind of challenge that those bring. Some goat hunts, and Chris mentioned it, a lot of goat hunts are pretty, you can get goats in good terrain, but there's a lot of times you probably shouldn't pull the trigger on a goat. Mm-hmm, yeah. And I've been fortunate on all hunts to be able to retrieve goats. But there's probably some that I know I've had to do solo retrievals because I wouldn't take 2 guys down there. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, just one last thing here that I should have asked a second ago too was, and this will be a good question for you, a guy that's killed a whole bunch of goats. What's sort of your minimum threshold? Like, when do you decide, hey, that's a good goat. That's a goat that I want to go after.
So I'm fortunate right now in that I pretty much am always the final, like for me personally, I'm at the 10-inch and over threshold. So I'm going on a lot of trips, like 2 goat hunts this year where I'm going to be the 3rd guy pulling the trigger because others are first time goat hunters, or I'm taking my son again or my nephew who are, just looking for a mature Billy. So, I mean, I would say a 9-inch goat is a good goat for, most individuals. If you're in the Kootenays though, a 9-inch goat's a big goat, because my 12-inch goat or 12-year-old goat was only just 9-inch or just 9 1/4 or just over. Wow. So the Kootenays is a lot smaller genetics. If you go up in, North Coast, you're going to get a bigger genetic goat. So you're probably 9 inches, a younger Billy can be 9. I had a 3-year-old that was 9 3/4.
Oh, wow.
And there's 3-year-olds that have been over 10.
Yeah.
So, for me though, I don't really need to shoot another goat necessarily. So I'm kind of trying to be a bit more
stingy,
more choosy. And there's other guys on the trip that are going to be hopefully pulling the trigger. So I'm just as fine with that. I find not pulling the trigger at all.
That's awesome. Marvin, thanks so much for spending your morning here and drinking coffee with me. And I'm excited to hear about how your season goes. And I think we're going to have to circle back around here and chat about sheep and grizzly bear here soon. Yeah. I'm pretty stoked about your trip. Especially for a kind of a first timer going out. And it's most of the time with new guys, they've said, "Oh, I've never done anything like this before." Like, it's usually a whole new experience, which is every hunt's different, right? Every species is different. And so, no, I'm pumped to hear how yours goes, and best wishes. Yeah. Hopefully I have a Billy to show you here in a few weeks. Yeah, no, all the best for sure. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave us a review. If you want to support the podcast, please check out the gear on our website at wildernesslocals.net.